In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 alien civilizations bow to the might of the hegemony, there exists a simple truth that has governed interstellar politics for millennia: humans are weak. Physically frail, technologically inferior, and emotionally unstable, they serve as little more than servants, translators, and oddities in the grand cosmic order. Their homeworld of Earth was conquered so easily that it became a cautionary tale whispered in alien academies: never grow too comfortable in peace, for even the weakest prey might struggle. But, sometimes, the greatest predators wear the most innocent faces. Sometimes, a single human with nothing but a tattoo and a secret can remind the galaxy why Earth's children were once called the most dangerous species to ever draw breath. Sometimes, the hegemony discovers that they didn't conquer humanity, they simply made the mistake of waking something that had chosen to sleep. The morning light of Kepler's binary stars cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Hegemony Council chamber, where the fate of 17 star systems was decided daily. In this temple of power, where beings from 100 worlds gathered to shape the galaxy's destiny, Maya-chan moved like a ghost through the corridors. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the polished stone, and her plain gray uniform marked her as what she had been for the past 3 years: invisible. She carried a tray of exotic refreshments toward the council chamber, each delicacy worth more than most beings earned in a lifetime. The Vorthak delegates preferred their nutrition cubes soaked in the fermented blood of Terran cattle. The crystalline Zephyrians required precisely heated silicon compounds that glowed like tiny stars. The hulking Brood-Arch representatives demanded live prey that squeaked and writhed in specialized containers. Maya had learned to prepare them all without flinching. As she approached the massive doors of the council chamber, she could hear the familiar rumble of voices engaged in heated debate. Today's session concerned the mining rights to the Andorian asteroid belt, a discussion that would determine whether billions of beings lived in prosperity or poverty. The fate of entire civilizations hung in the balance, decided by creatures who viewed such decisions as mere business transactions. The doors, each standing 30 feet tall and carved from a single piece of Altarian crystal, recognized her biometric signature and slid open with a whisper. Inside, the circular chamber rose like a vast amphitheater, with delegate platforms suspended at various heights to accommodate different species' atmospheric and gravitational needs. At the center, a holographic display showed the contested asteroid field in stunning detail. Maya entered through the servant's entrance, keeping her eyes downcast as she had been trained. The first rule of human survival in hegemony space was simple: never draw attention to yourself. Humans were tolerated because they were useful, their linguistic abilities allowed them to serve as translators, their dexterity made them excellent servants, and their psychological makeup rendered them naturally subservient to stronger species. At least, that was what the hegemony believed. She began her rounds, starting with the Vorthak delegation. The 3 lizard-like beings barely acknowledged her presence as she placed their refreshments on the elegant serving table beside their platform. Their scales, each the size of a human palm, shifted from deep green to aggressive orange as they argued among themselves in their guttural language. "The Andorian belt belongs to those strong enough to claim it," hissed the lead Vorthak, his forked tongue tasting the air for signs of deception. These collective worlds grew fat and lazy during the peace. They deserve nothing. His companion's tail lashed with excitement. Agreed. The strong take what they will, and the weak submit. This is the natural order. Maya understood every word, though she gave no sign of comprehension. Her ability to speak over 40 galactic languages was why she had been purchased from the Earth Colonial Authority 3 years ago. The Hegemony Council valued her skills, but, to them, she was still just a more sophisticated piece of equipment. Moving to the next platform, she served the crystalline delegation. These beings of living silicon communicated through harmonic frequencies that most species couldn't even hear, but Maya had learned to interpret the subtle vibrations. They were discussing private communications with the Brood-Arch, planning to vote as a bloc in exchange for exclusive trading rights. The corruption was so casual, so accepted, that Maya had long since stopped feeling surprised by it. In her 3 years of service, she had witnessed the casual destruction of worlds, the enslavement of entire species, and the sale of civilizations like commodities in a marketplace. The hegemony maintained order through strength, and strength meant the right to take whatever you could hold. As she moved through the chamber, her trained ear caught fragments of a dozen conversations in twice as many languages. The hegemony's universal translator systems were adequate for formal proceedings, But the real business was conducted in private languages and coded phrases that only beings like Maya could fully comprehend. She had learned, over the years, to build a complete picture of hegemony politics from these fragments. She knew which delegates were taking bribes, which species were planning military actions, and which worlds would soon face liberation by hegemony forces. The information flowed around her like water around a stone, and she absorbed it all. The knowledge was dangerous. A human servant who knew too much about hegemony business had a tendency to suffer unfortunate accidents. Maya had survived by being invisible, by never showing that she understood more than her basic duties required, and by never giving anyone reason to question her loyalty or capabilities. But, sometimes, late at night in her small quarters, she would trace the outline of the tattoo hidden beneath her uniform and remember who she used to be. The tattoo was a masterwork of Terran artistry, a Siberian tiger rendered in flowing lines across her back and shoulder. The artist had captured every detail, the powerful muscles, the intelligent eyes, the barely contained savagery that made tigers the apex predator of Earth's largest continent. It was beautiful, and it was dangerous, and it was completely hidden from the aliens who owned her. The hegemony knew humans as weak and compliant. They had conquered Earth in a matter of months, facing minimal resistance from a species they viewed as barely above animals in intelligence and capability. The human governments had surrendered quickly, trading the freedom of their people for the promise of survival under hegemony rule. What the hegemony didn't know was that Earth's governments had surrendered so quickly not because they were weak, but because they were buying time. Scattered across the galaxy, hidden among the servant populations and refugee communities, were others like Maya. They called themselves the Sleeping Tigers, and they had been waiting for the right moment to wake up. Maya finished her serving rounds and began the careful process of clearing used dishes. As she worked, she listened to the debate reaching its conclusion. The Andorian mining rights would go to the highest bidder, as they always did. The indigenous populations would be relocated to more suitable worlds, a euphemism for slave camps and labor colonies. Billions of beings would suffer so that a few alien corporations could increase their profit margins. It was just another day in the hegemony's version of galactic civilization. As she prepared to leave the chamber, Maya noticed something that made her blood freeze. On one of the secondary platforms, a small group of beings was engaged in quiet conversation. She recognized them as intelligence operatives from the Internal Security Division, the hegemony's secret police. The human populations have been quiet for too long, one was saying in the clicking language of the insectoid hives. Our psychological analysts suggest this is unusual behavior. Most conquered species show periodic unrest for at least a decade. His companion, a tall gray being with large black eyes, responded in the same language. Perhaps they are simply more thoroughly broken than previous conquests. Their surrender was remarkably quick. Perhaps. But I want increased surveillance on the human servant populations. Something feels wrong about their compliance. No species adapts to servitude this completely without some form of resistance movement. Maya's hands remained steady as she continued clearing dishes, but her mind was racing. The hegemony was starting to suspect that human compliance was too perfect, too complete. If they began serious investigations into the human populations, they might discover the truth about the sleeping tigers. She needed to get word to the others. The time for sleeping might be coming to an end. As she left the council chamber, Maya's fingers unconsciously traced the hidden outline of her tattoo. The tiger beneath her uniform remained still and patient, but she could feel it stirring. After 3 years of watching the galaxy burn, after 3 years of serving the beings who had enslaved her people, the predator was beginning to wake up. The hegemony had made one critical error in their conquest of Earth. They had assumed that a quick surrender meant a broken spirit. They had assumed that humans who served without complaint were humans who had accepted their fate. They had assumed that 3 years of peace meant 3 years of victory. They had never considered the possibility that some humans were simply better at choosing their battles. Maya returned to the servant quarters, her duties complete for the morning. She had 4 hours before the afternoon session, 4 hours to continue the careful work she had been doing for 3 years. In her small room, hidden behind a false panel she had installed herself, was a communications array that would have impressed even hegemony engineers. For 3 years, she had been gathering intelligence, building networks, and passing information to other sleeping tigers scattered across the galaxy. For 3 years, she had played the role of a harmless human servant while secretly mapping every weakness in the hegemony's vast empire. The hegemony believed they had conquered humanity. In truth, they had simply provided humanity with the perfect opportunity to study their conquerors from the inside. Every human servant in every hegemony facility was a potential intelligence asset. Every refugee camp was a recruiting ground. Every act of casual cruelty was another reason for the tigers to wake up. Maya activated her hidden communications array and began composing a message that would eventually reach sleeping tigers across 17 star systems. The message was simple, encoded in a frequency that mimicked the background radiation of space itself. The hegemony suspects. Prepare for acceleration. The time of sleeping grows short. As she transmitted the message, Maya felt the tiger tattoo seem to warm against her skin. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, other tigers were receiving similar signals. The network that humanity had spent 3 years building was preparing to activate. The hegemony had conquered Earth believing they had broken humanity's spirit. They had scattered humans across the galaxy believing they had prevented any possibility of organized resistance. They had reduced Earth's children to servants and refugees believing they had eliminated humanity as a threat. Soon, they would learn the difference between surrender and strategy. Soon, they would discover why Earth's predators had evolved to hunt in coordinated packs. Soon, the sleeping tigers would wake up, and the galaxy would remember why humans had once been the most feared species to emerge from the darkness between the stars. But that awakening would come later. For now, Maya Chin continued to serve refreshments and clear dishes, just another invisible human in the vast machinery of the hegemony. Just another harmless servant with nothing more dangerous than a hidden tattoo. The tigers were still sleeping. But they were beginning to dream of hunting. The response came faster than Maya had expected. Within 18 hours of her transmission, coded replies began filtering back through the quantum communication network that the sleeping tigers had spent 3 years establishing. Each message was brief, encrypted, and routed through dozens of relay points to avoid detection, but together they painted a picture that made Maya's heart race with a mixture of hope and terror. The network was vast. From the mining colonies of Kepler 442 became confirmation that 17 sleeping tigers were embedded in the asteroid processing facilities, monitoring hegemony resource extraction operations. From the luxury worlds of the core systems, hidden servants reported that they had been documenting the personal habits and security protocols of high-ranking hegemony officials. From the outer rim territories, refugee camps that the hegemony believed were broken populations of defeated humans confirmed that they had been secretly training and organizing. Maya had known the network existed, but she had never realized its true scope. What had begun as scattered cells of resistance had grown into something approaching a shadow government. While the hegemony had congratulated themselves on the successful integration of human populations, those same populations had been quietly building the infrastructure for the largest intelligence operation in galactic history. The third day after her initial transmission brought a message that changed everything. It came through the deepest channels, encrypted with keys that only the highest levels of the Sleeping Tiger organization possessed. When Maya finally decoded it, she found herself staring at coordinates and a timestamp that made her blood turn to ice. The message was brief: asset confirmed. Primary target identified. Operation Awakening authorized. Stand by for immediate deployment orders. Maya sat in her small quarters, staring at the decoded text, and realized that 3 years of careful intelligence gathering were about to culminate in something unprecedented. The sleeping tigers weren't just preparing to wake up, they were preparing to strike. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Maya prepared for her usual duties in the council chamber, she received a summons that had never come before. She was to report to the office of High Counselor Vordhak Prime, the supreme commander of the hegemony's military forces and one of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. The walk to the High Counselor's office took Maya through sections of the administrative complex she had never seen before. The corridors grew wider and more elaborate as she approached the centers of power, with walls decorated in the artistic traditions of 100 conquered worlds. The spoils of galactic empire were displayed like trophies, each piece representing the destruction of another civilization. Maya had learned to control her reactions to such displays, but today she felt the tiger stirring beneath her skin. The beautiful artifacts around her represented billions of dead beings, cultures erased to satisfy alien vanity. Soon, she promised herself, there would be a reckoning for such casual genocide. The High Counselor's office occupied an entire floor of the central spire. When Maya was finally admitted to the inner chamber, she found herself in a space that could have housed a small starship. The ceiling rose 100 feet above her head, supported by pillars carved from the crystallized remains of destroyed worlds. At the far end of the chamber, behind a desk the size of a landing pad, sat the most dangerous being in the galaxy. Vorthak Prime was old even by the standards of his long-lived species. His scales had deepened to the black-green color that marked a Vorthak elder, and his eyes held the cold intelligence of a being who had personally overseen the conquest of 40 star systems. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Approach, human." Maya walked across the vast floor, her footsteps echoing in the chamber's acoustic design. She stopped at the appropriate distance and performed the submissive bow that human servants were required to display before hegemony officials. Every movement was perfect, practiced through 3 years of careful performance. "You are the one called Maya Chen," the High Counselor said, consulting a holographic display that materialized above his desk. 3 years of exemplary service. Linguistic abilities in 47 languages. No disciplinary incidents. No suspicious behavior reported by supervisory staff. "Yes, High Counselor," Maya replied, keeping her voice steady and respectful. Inside, her mind was racing through possibilities. Why had she been summoned? Had her intelligence activities been discovered? Was this some kind of test? "I have a special assignment for you," Vorthak Prime continued. "Tomorrow, the Hegemony Council will host a delegation from the Outer Rim Collective. These beings have been resistant to full integration into our galactic community. The negotiations will require precise translation services for several rare dialects." Maya nodded attentively, but her enhanced hearing was picking up something else, the subtle sound of recording devices activating throughout the chamber. This wasn't just an assignment. It was a setup. "The negotiations are of critical importance to galactic stability," the High Counselor continued. "Any irregularities in translation services could have serious consequences for all involved parties." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maya was being warned that her performance would be under special scrutiny. But why? What had triggered this level of attention? "I understand, High Counselor. I will perform my duties with complete accuracy and discretion." Vorthak Prime's eyes studied her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "I am certain you will." Dismissed. As Maya left the High Counselor's office, she felt the weight of invisible observation. Somewhere in the vast administrative complex, beings were watching her every move, analyzing her every reaction. The hegemony's suspicions about human compliance had crystallized into active surveillance. She had perhaps hours before her cover was blown completely. Back in her quarters, Maya activated her communications array for what might be the final time. The message she composed was brief and urgent: "Surveillance confirmed. Cover compromised. Request immediate extraction protocols." The response came within minutes, faster than any previous communication. It contained 3 words that made Maya's hands shake as she decoded them: negative. Stand firm. The sleeping tigers were telling her to maintain her position despite the mortal danger. That could only mean one thing: whatever operation was being planned was so important that they were willing to sacrifice her to protect it. Maya stared at the message for a long moment, then began the process of purging her communications equipment. If she was going to be captured, she wouldn't give the hegemony any more intelligence than necessary. The quantum relays dissolved into their component atoms at the touch of a concealed destruct sequence, leaving no trace of their existence. That night, Maya lay in her narrow bed and traced the outline of her tattoo one final time. The tiger seemed to pulse beneath her fingertips, as if responding to her touch. Tomorrow would bring the most dangerous performance of her life. She would have to serve as translator for negotiations while under intensive surveillance, knowing that a single slip could expose not just herself but the entire sleeping tiger network. The next morning brought news that changed the entire situation. As Maya prepared for the day's negotiations, her enhanced communication implant, a piece of biotechnology so advanced that the hegemony hadn't detected it, received an emergency transmission. The message came from a source she had never heard from before, transmitted on frequencies that bypassed every security protocol she knew existed. When she finally decoded it, she found herself reading intelligence that made her previous discoveries seem insignificant by comparison. The Outer Rim Collective delegation wasn't just coming for negotiations. They were representatives of a secret alliance of 17 independent species that had been preparing for war against the hegemony. The negotiations were a cover for the final intelligence-gathering mission before a coordinated assault on key hegemony facilities. And Maya wasn't the only sleeping tiger who would be in the room. The revelation that other human operatives were embedded in the delegation transformed Maya's understanding of the situation. The sleeping tigers hadn't just been gathering intelligence, they had been actively coordinating with other species planning resistance against hegemony rule. The network was even more extensive than she had imagined, reaching beyond human populations to include alien allies who shared humanity's desire for freedom. As Maya made her way to the council chamber, she began to understand why her superiors had ordered her to maintain position despite the danger. Today's negotiations weren't just another diplomatic meeting. They were the final preparation for the largest coordinated attack on hegemony power in galactic history. The council chamber had been reconfigured for the special session. Additional platforms had been installed to accommodate the diverse atmospheric and gravitational needs of the Outer Rim species. Security was visibly heavier than usual, with armed guards from multiple hegemony species stationed at every entrance. Maya took her position at the translator's station, an elevated platform that gave her clear sightlines to all the delegates. As the Outer Rim representatives began filing in, she used her enhanced visual implants to identify potential allies among the delegation. The third delegate through the door made her heart skip a beat. He appeared to be a standard Andromedan trader, complete with the species' characteristic blue skin and silver eyes. But, as he passed beneath her platform, he made a gesture so subtle that only someone trained in sleeping tiger recognition codes would notice it, a brief touch to his left shoulder, exactly where Maya's tattoo was hidden. The Andromedans were extinct. The hegemony had wiped out their entire civilization 2 years ago as an example to other resistant species. The being below was wearing a sophisticated biological disguise, and underneath it was almost certainly another human operative. As more delegates entered, Maya spotted 2 more recognition signals. A Centaurian diplomat touched her right temple in the coded sequence. A Regelian trader adjusted his ceremonial robes in a pattern that spelled out tiger in the gestural language that human children learned in their first years of schooling. The sleeping tigers weren't just observing today's negotiations. They were actively participating in them. High Counselor Vorthak Prime entered the chamber with a retinue of military advisors and intelligence operatives. Maya noticed that the security presence included several beings she recognized from the Internal Security Division. Today's meeting was clearly considered a high-risk event by hegemony leadership. The negotiations will begin immediately, the High Counselor announced in the universal trade language. The Outer Rim Collective has requested these discussions regarding their full integration into hegemony administrative structures. The lead delegate from the collective, a tall being with the distinctive carapace of a Shellan warrior, rose to respond. We appreciate the hegemony's willingness to negotiate. Our species have maintained independence for many cycles, but we recognize the benefits of joining your galactic community. Maya began translating, her voice carrying the delegates' words into the multiple languages required for full comprehension by all parties. But, as she worked, she was also listening for the coded phrases that would indicate the real purpose of the meeting. They came in the third exchange, embedded in what seemed like routine diplomatic pleasantries. The Shellan delegate's response to a question about trade agreements included a phrase that, in his species' ancient ceremonial language, translated roughly to "the hunt begins at sunset." Similar coded messages began appearing in the speeches of other delegates. Maya translated them faithfully into the official languages while her enhanced memory systems recorded every coded phrase for later analysis. A pattern was emerging, a complex web of information that painted a picture of coordinated military action. The Outer Rim Collective wasn't planning to join the hegemony. They were finalizing plans to destroy it. As the morning session progressed, Maya began to understand the scope of what was being planned. The coded messages revealed a multi-pronged assault that would target key hegemony installations across the galaxy simultaneously. While the main military strike would focus on command and control facilities, coordinated sabotage operations would cripple the hegemony's ability to respond effectively. The Sleeping Tigers were providing intelligence for the sabotage operations, but they were also planning something more ambitious. Hidden in the most deeply coded messages was reference to Project Awakening, a coordinated uprising of human populations across every major hegemony facility. Maya felt the tiger beneath her skin stirring as she realized what was coming. After 3 years of careful preparation, after 3 years of playing the role of harmless servants, humanity was preparing to remind the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The afternoon session brought the final pieces of the puzzle. As negotiations continued, Maya intercepted communications between the hegemony security forces that revealed the true extent of their suspicions. They knew something was happening, but they didn't understand what. Their intelligence suggested coordinated activity among multiple species, but they couldn't identify the source or nature of the threat. They were blind to the approaching storm. As the day's sessions concluded, Maya prepared for what would likely be her final night as a sleeping tiger. Tomorrow would bring either liberation or death, and she was ready for either outcome. The tiger had been sleeping long enough. That evening, as she traced her tattoo one last time, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been Dr. Maya Chen, xenolinguist and cultural anthropologist, specializing in the analysis of alien communication systems. She had volunteered for the Sleeping Tiger program because she believed that understanding your enemy was the key to defeating them. Tomorrow, she would discover whether 3 years of intelligence gathering had been enough to bring down the most powerful empire in galactic history. The tigers were about to wake up, and the galaxy would never be the same. The morning of the third day brought news that shattered the careful facade Maya had maintained for 3 years. As she prepared for what she believed would be another routine translation session, her communication implant received an emergency burst transmission that made her blood freeze. Agent Korath, one of the disguised humans in the Outer Rim delegation, had been compromised. The message was fragmentary, transmitted in the microsecond before capture, but it contained enough information to paint a terrifying picture. Korath's biological disguise had failed during the night, revealing his true human identity to hegemony security forces. Under interrogation, he had broken after 6 hours of advanced torture techniques. The Sleeping Tiger network was blown. Maya stood in her small quarters, staring at the decoded message, and realized that everything had changed. The carefully planned operation was collapsing before it could begin. Security forces were already moving to arrest human servants throughout the facility. She had perhaps minutes before armed guards arrived at her door. But, as she processed this disaster, another part of the transmission came through: a final message from the network command structure. Despite the compromise, despite the exposure, Operation Awakening was proceeding as planned. The attack on hegemony facilities would begin in 4 hours, whether or not the intelligence assets were still in position. Maya felt the tiger beneath her skin stir with predatory anticipation. The time for hiding was over. She moved with practiced efficiency, activating contingency protocols she had hoped never to use. Hidden panels throughout her quarters opened to reveal equipment that would have astonished her hegemony overseers: military-grade weapons, advanced surveillance gear, and communication systems that incorporated technology beyond anything the aliens possessed. The truth was that Earth's surrender had been more than a strategic deception. It had been an intelligence coup on a galactic scale. While the hegemony believed they were conquering a primitive world, they had actually encountered the survivors of a civilization that had been fighting interstellar wars for longer than most alien species had possessed space travel. Humanity had learned to hide their true capabilities because they had learned, over millennia of conflict, that survival sometimes required appearing harmless until the moment came to strike. Maya stripped off her servant's uniform and pulled on the combat gear she had kept hidden for 3 years. The transformation was remarkable. The submissive human servant disappeared, replaced by something that moved with lethal grace and predatory purpose. When she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she saw what the hegemony had never suspected existed: a human military operative trained in warfare techniques that had been refined across 100 battlefields. The tattoo on her back seemed to come alive as she prepared for battle. The tiger's eyes blazed with barely contained fury, and its claws appeared to flex with anticipation. It was no longer just artwork, it had become a declaration of war. Her door chimed with the arrival of visitors. Through her concealed surveillance systems, Maya watched as a full squad of hegemony security forces took positions outside her quarters. They were heavily armed and, obviously, prepared for resistance, but their formations and tactics revealed they were expecting to face a cornered servant, not a trained warrior. Maya smiled, and, for the first time in 3 years, she allowed her true nature to show. The expression that crossed her face would have terrified any human who saw it, and it was about to be the last thing several alien soldiers ever witnessed. She opened the door with apparent compliance, stepping into the corridor with her hands raised in surrender. The security team leader, a massive brute-arch warrior whose species prided itself on physical dominance, gestured for her to move toward the detention area. "Human Maya Chen," he growled in the universal trade language, "you are under arrest for activities against hegemony security. You will comply with detention procedures." "Of course," Maya replied, her voice still carrying the submissive tone she had perfected over 3 years. "I don't understand what this is about, but I'll cooperate fully." The brute-arch relaxed slightly at her apparent compliance. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Maya moved with explosive speed that defied everything the hegemony believed about human physical capabilities. Her first strike crushed the security leader's throat before he could react. Her second disabled the energy weapons of 2 nearby guards. Her third began a sequence of attacks that transformed the corridor into a battlefield. The hegemony security forces had trained to handle resistance from various alien species, but they had never encountered a human in combat. Their intelligence files described humans as physically weak, slow to react, and prone to panic under pressure. They were completely unprepared for an opponent who moved like liquid death and struck with precision that seemed to anticipate their every action. Maya fought with techniques that incorporated 3 years of studying alien anatomy and combat capabilities. Every strike was calculated to exploit the specific weaknesses of each species she faced. The brute-arch died from a precise blow to his species' vulnerable nerve cluster. The insectoid guards fell to attacks that severed their primary neural pathways. The energy-based lifeforms were disrupted by frequencies that Maya had learned to generate with her enhanced vocal cords. In under 2 minutes, the entire security squad was dead, and Maya was already moving toward her next objective. The alarm systems activated as she reached the main corridor, filling the air with warning tones that would bring reinforcements from across the facility. But Maya was no longer trying to hide. She was hunting. Her enhanced sensory implants guided her through the administrative complex toward the council chamber, where she knew High Counselor Vorthak Prime would be coordinating the response to the crisis. Along the way, she encountered 3 more security teams, each believing they were pursuing a fleeing servant. None of them survived the encounter. Maya's movements through the facility were those of a predator in her natural element. She used ventilation systems, maintenance passages, and architectural blind spots that she had memorized during 3 years of apparently menial service. Every route had been planned, every contingency considered. The harmless servant had actually been conducting a detailed reconnaissance mission that would have impressed military strategists across the galaxy. As she approached the council chamber, Maya's communication implant activated with reports from across the facility. Other sleeping tigers were awakening throughout the complex, and their actions were transforming the Hegemony Administrative Center into a war zone. The reports painted a picture of coordinated mayhem. Human servants in the communications center had simultaneously activated viruses that were crashing computer systems across 17 star systems. Maintenance workers had triggered cascade failures in the facility's power grid and life support systems. Kitchen staff had introduced exotic toxins into the ventilation systems that were specifically designed to affect different alien species. But the most devastating reports came from the detention levels, where human prisoners who had been held for various infractions were breaking free in coordinated escape attempts. The hegemony had unknowingly concentrated some of Earth's most dangerous military specialists in their prison facilities, believing they were simply warehousing troublesome servants. Maya reached the council chamber to find it in chaos. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the vast space, and the sound of weapons fire echoed from multiple levels. Through the transparent aluminum observation windows, she could see hegemony forces attempting to establish defensive positions while under attack from enemies they couldn't locate or effectively engage. High Counselor Vorthak Prime stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by his personal guard and barking orders into a communication device. Even in crisis, he maintained the arrogant bearing of a being accustomed to absolute power. Maya entered through the servant's access, moving through shadows that seemed to welcome her presence. The chamber's security systems, designed to prevent external threats, had never been configured to stop someone who already had legitimate access to the facility. She was within striking distance before anyone noticed her presence. "High Counselor," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with casual authority. Vorthak Prime turned toward the sound, and his eyes widened as he saw not the submissive servant he expected, but a human warrior armed with weapons that radiated lethal capability. "Impossible," he hissed, his scales shifting to the deep red that indicated extreme agitation. "Humans are weak. Humans are broken. You surrendered to us." Maya smiled, and this time she made no effort to hide the predatory intelligence in her expression. "We didn't surrender, High Counselor. We strategically withdrew to better positions." Around the chamber, Vorthak Prime's guards were raising their weapons, but Maya had spent 3 years studying their reaction times and combat capabilities. She knew exactly how long it would take them to acquire targets and fire, and she moved with the precision of someone who had choreographed this encounter down to the microsecond. The first guard died before his weapon cleared its holster. The second managed to activate his energy rifle but never had a chance to fire it. The third actually got off a shot, but Maya was no longer where he was aiming. In the space of 5 heartbeats, the most powerful being in the galaxy found himself alone and defenseless, facing a human who had just demonstrated capabilities that shattered every assumption about her species. "You want to know the truth about humanity, High Counselor?" Maya asked, advancing slowly toward the alien leader. "The truth is that we've been at war for so long that we've learned to make peace itself into a weapon." Vorthak Prime backed toward the chamber's main display, his hands reaching for emergency controls that would summon additional security forces. "The hegemony will not fall to primitive mammals," he snarled. "Our fleets control 1,000 star systems. Our armies number in the billions. Your fleets are currently discovering that their human maintenance crews have been very creative with sabotage techniques," Maya replied, her voice carrying the casual confidence of someone stating obvious facts. "Your armies are learning that their human support staff have been mapping every weakness in your military installations for 3 years." The truth was even more devastating than her words suggested. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy as Operation Awakening reached full implementation. Human populations that had appeared docile and broken were revealing themselves as coordinated resistance cells. Hegemony installations were falling to attacks that seemed to anticipate their every defensive measure. The conquered were conquering their conquerors. "But the real truth, High Counselor, is simpler than galactic strategy," Maya continued, now close enough to strike. "The real truth is that humanity spent 3 years learning everything about you while you learned nothing about us." She moved with fluid grace, disabling Vorthak Prime's defensive systems before he could activate them. The alien leader, who had personally overseen the conquest of 40 star systems, found himself as helpless as any of the billions he had enslaved. "My name is Dr. Maya Chen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone reclaiming her true identity. "Xenolinguist, cultural anthropologist, and lieutenant colonel in Earth's Strategic Intelligence Division. For 3 years, I have served your refreshments and translated your conversations while documenting every weakness in your empire." Vorthak Prime's eyes showed the first flicker of true understanding. "You studied us. We dissected you," Maya corrected. "We mapped your psychology, your military capabilities, your political structures, and your technological limitations. We learned to speak your languages better than you do. We learned to anticipate your strategies before you conceived them. We learned to be invisible in plain sight while we prepared to destroy everything you built." The chamber's main display activated, showing tactical readouts from across the galaxy. The news was uniformly devastating for the hegemony. Human uprisings were succeeding on every front, supported by alien allies who had been secretly coordinating with the Sleeping Tiger network. Earth's children are waking up across the galaxy, Maya said, watching the displays with satisfaction. In mining colonies and luxury worlds, in prison camps and administrative centers, humanity is remembering what we were before you conquered us. She turned back to Vorthak Prime, and, for the first time, he saw her tattoo fully revealed. The tiger seemed to move in the emergency lighting, its eyes blazing with predatory hunger, its claws extended in preparation for the kill. Do you know what Earth's apex predators hunt, High Counselor? Vorthak Prime could only stare at the image of the tiger, finally, understanding what his people had tried to cage. Everything, Maya answered her own question. Earth's tigers hunt everything that moves, everything that breathes, everything that dares to compete with them for territory. She raised her weapon, and, in that moment, Vorthak Prime realized that the hegemony had never conquered humanity. They had simply provided humanity with the perfect opportunity to study their prey. And, now, Maya said, the hunt begins. The tiger had awakened, and the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. The execution of High Counselor Vorthak Prime sent shockwaves throughout the hegemony that reached far beyond the administrative center where Maya stood over his lifeless body. Within minutes of his death, emergency protocols activated across 17 star systems, calling hegemony fleets home to deal with what their commanders initially believed was a localized rebellion. They had no idea they were facing the coordinated awakening of the most dangerous predator species the galaxy had ever seen. Maya moved through the chaos of the collapsing council chamber with predatory grace, her enhanced communication implants tracking the progress of Operation Awakening across the known galaxy. The reports flowing in painted a picture that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Humanity was dismantling the hegemony with surgical precision. On Kepler Prime, the agricultural world that fed half the core systems, human agricultural workers had simultaneously activated biological agents that were destroying specific crops while leaving others untouched. The hegemony's food supply was collapsing in calculated patterns that would force their military to choose between feeding their populations and maintaining their war machine. From the industrial complexes of Rigel 7 came reports that human technical staff had activated dormant viruses in every major manufacturing system. The viruses were works of art. They allowed essential systems to continue functioning while slowly degrading weapons production, ship construction, and military logistics. The hegemony's industrial base was being systematically crippled by beings they had dismissed as barely intelligent laborers. But, the most devastating reports came from the hegemony military installations themselves. Human maintenance crews, support staff, and technical specialists were revealing themselves as saboteurs who had spent 3 years learning every weakness in alien military systems. Weapons that wouldn't fire, ships that couldn't navigate, and communication systems that broadcast false information were turning the hegemony's greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. Maya reached the facility's main communication center to find it already under human control. The 3 technicians who had appeared to be simple maintenance workers for the past 2 years had revealed themselves as Earth's most advanced electronic warfare specialists. The chamber was filled with holographic displays showing the collapse of hegemony power structures across the galaxy. Status report, Maya requested, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding military operations. The lead technician, a woman Maya had known as quiet and submissive, turned to face her with eyes that blazed with tactical intelligence. Colonel Chen, Operation Awakening is exceeding all projections. Human cells have achieved primary objectives in 87% of targeted facilities. Hegemony communication networks are under our control in 12 star systems. Their fleet movements are being tracked and anticipated through the intelligence networks we've built into their own systems. Maya felt the tiger tattoo seem to pulse with satisfaction. Resistance? Minimal and disorganized. They're still trying to understand what's happening. Most hegemony commanders are operating under the assumption that they're facing equipment failures and coincidental uprisings. They haven't yet realized they're fighting a coordinated military campaign. The displays around the communication center showed the scope of humanity's deception. What appeared to be scattered populations of defeated refugees were revealing themselves as military assets that had been strategically positioned across the galaxy. Every human servant, every maintenance worker, every apparently broken prisoner had been an intelligence operative gathering data and preparing for this moment. Phase 2 implementation? Maya asked. Beginning now, the technician replied, activating a new set of protocols. The Outer Rim Collective is moving their fleets into attack positions. Our intelligence on hegemony defensive capabilities is being transmitted to Allied commanders in real time. They know exactly where to strike and how to avoid hegemony countermeasures. Maya watched the tactical displays shift as alien fleets that had supposedly come for negotiations revealed themselves as a coordinated attack force. The Outer Rim Collective had been planning this assault for years, but they had needed detailed intelligence on hegemony capabilities to ensure success. The Sleeping Tiger Network had provided that intelligence, and now the galaxy's oppressed species were striking back with precision that terrified their former oppressors. From the Centauri systems came reports of simultaneous attacks on key hegemony strongholds, coordinated with sabotage operations that left the defenders blind and helpless. The Andromedans, whose extinction had been greatly exaggerated, emerged from hidden bases with fleets that incorporated technology the hegemony had never seen. Species that had supposedly submitted to hegemony rule were revealing that they had been preparing for war while pretending to embrace peace. But the most shocking revelation was the scope of humanity's hidden capabilities. The species that the hegemony had conquered in a matter of months was demonstrating tactical sophistication that suggested centuries of military development. Human intelligence operations were coordinating attacks across distances that should have made such coordination impossible. Human saboteurs were demonstrating knowledge of alien technology that exceeded that of the aliens themselves. Maya moved to the facility's main strategic planning center, where the full scope of the operation was becoming clear. The humans who had appeared to be clerks and data processors were revealing themselves as military analysts who had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history. "What you're seeing," explained Dr. Sarah Kim, a woman Maya had known as a shy archive assistant, "is the result of 3 years of total intelligence penetration. We haven't just been gathering information, we've been actively shaping hegemony decision-making through carefully introduced data and strategic suggestions." Maya stared at the display showing hegemony fleet movements and realized the implications. "We've been manipulating their strategic decisions?" "For 3 years," Dr. Kim confirmed. "Every major hegemony military deployment, every resource allocation decision, every security protocol has been influenced by intelligence we've provided through our network. They think they're reacting to random events, but they're actually following a strategic plan we wrote." The revelation was staggering. Humanity hadn't just been preparing to strike back against the hegemony, they had been actively manipulating their enemies into increasingly vulnerable positions. The careful placement of human assets across the galaxy hadn't been random refugee settlement. It had been the positioning of military resources for a campaign that had been planned from the moment Earth surrendered. "Phase 3? Maya asked. "The revelation," Dr. Kim replied, activating a galaxy-wide communication broadcast. "Time to let them know who they've really been fighting." The transmission that went out across every communication network in hegemony space carried a simple message, broadcast in 47 languages and transmitted on frequencies that would reach every populated world in the galaxy. "Citizens of the galaxy, this is Dr. Maya Chen, speaking for the people of Earth and our allies in the Outer Rim Collective. For 3 years, you have been told that humanity surrendered to hegemony rule because we were weak and primitive. This was a deception. We surrendered to gain access to your facilities, your technology, and your strategic information. Every human servant in every hegemony installation has been an intelligence operative. Every refugee camp has been a training facility. Every act of apparent submission has been preparation for this moment. The hegemony is no longer the dominant power in this galaxy. Their fleets are crippled by sabotage we have conducted over 3 years of patient preparation. Their industrial base is collapsing under biological and electronic attacks we have been positioning since the day we surrendered. Their communication networks are under our control, and their strategic decisions have been shaped by intelligence we have provided. To the oppressed peoples of the galaxy, we offer alliance and support in reclaiming your freedom. To the hegemony forces still capable of receiving this message, we offer one chance at surrender. Earth's children are awake, and we are done pretending to be harmless." The broadcast reached every corner of hegemony space, and the response was immediate and dramatic. On worlds where human populations had seemed docile and broken, coordinated uprisings began within minutes. Alien species that had been oppressed by hegemony rule saw their chance for freedom and seized it. Hegemony forces found themselves facing enemies on every front, opponents who seemed to know their every weakness and anticipate their every move. Maya watched the reports flood in and felt a fierce satisfaction that had been building for 3 years. The hegemony had made a critical error in their understanding of human psychology. They had assumed that a quick surrender meant a broken spirit. They had never considered the possibility that some species were capable of strategic patience on a scale that measured decades rather than months. From the detention levels came reports that made the victory even sweeter. Hegemony officials who had overseen the enslavement of human populations were finding themselves prisoners of the beings they had brutalized. The casual cruelty that had characterized alien rule was being answered with precisely calibrated justice that reflected 3 years of careful documentation of war crimes. But Maya's attention was drawn to a display showing the approach of the hegemony's reserve fleets, massive armadas that had been held back to deal with exactly this kind of crisis. Even crippled by sabotage, even facing coordinated attack from unexpected directions, the hegemony still possessed enough military power to devastate entire star systems. Status of the reserve fleets, she asked. Converging on human population centers, Dr. Kim replied grimly. They're preparing to implement what they call terminal sterilization protocols. If they can't maintain control, they're planning to eliminate the human threat permanently. Maya felt the tiger beneath her skin stir with predatory anticipation. The hegemony's response was predictable. When faced with an enemy they couldn't understand or control, they would resort to genocide. It was the same strategy they had used against dozens of other species, and they assumed it would work against humanity as well. They were about to learn why Earth had survived every extinction event in its planet's violent history. Activate Phase 4, Maya ordered. Dr. Kim's fingers moved across her control interface with practiced precision. Phase 4 confirmed. All units, implement Protocol Phoenix. The name was appropriate. What the hegemony didn't know was that humanity's surrender had included the secret evacuation of Earth's most critical resources, not just people, but genetic material, cultural archives, and technological specifications for weapons systems that had been developed during humanity's violent prehistoric period. The beings who thought they had conquered Earth had actually been preserving humanity's most dangerous capabilities while providing them with detailed intelligence on alien technology. The approaching hegemony fleets were about to encounter Earth's children armed with weapons that combined human ingenuity with 3 years of studying alien military systems. The species that had conquered the galaxy through superior technology was about to face opponents who had learned to turn that technology against its creators. Maya moved to the facility's main observation deck, where she could watch the approaching battle. In the distance, she could see the first flashes of weapons fire as human forces engaged the hegemony reserve fleets. The enemy had superior numbers and heavier weapons, but they were fighting an opponent who had spent 3 years learning to anticipate their every tactic. The reports from the first engagements were everything Maya had hoped for. Human forces were using modified hegemony weapons that incorporated design improvements their alien creators had never imagined. Ships that should have been outmatched were demonstrating capabilities that turned every engagement into a technical masterclass in applied engineering. But the most devastating weapon humanity employed was the one they had always possessed, the ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. Every hegemony tactic was met with countermeasures that seemed to anticipate their next move. Every technological advantage was neutralized by human modifications that improved on the original design. The galaxy was learning why Earth's species had climbed to the top of their world's food chain despite being smaller and weaker than many of their competitors. They had won through intelligence, coordination, and the willingness to use any available resource as a weapon. As Maya watched the battle unfold, she traced the outline of her tattoo one final time. The tiger had fully awakened, and it was hunting across the stars. The hegemony had wanted to cage humanity, but they had only provided them with the perfect opportunity to study their prey. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. Soon, the final phase of Operation Awakening would begin, and the hegemony would learn what happened when you gave Earth's apex predators 3 years to prepare for war. The sleeping tigers were fully awake, and they were hungry for justice. 6 months after the fall of the last hegemony stronghold, Maya Chen stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching construction crews install the final components of the Galactic Liberation Council's new headquarters. The station orbited Earth's moon, deliberately positioned where every being in the galaxy could see that humanity had not only survived their conquest but had emerged stronger than ever. The view through the massive transparent aluminum windows showed a galaxy in transformation. Ships from 100 liberated worlds moved through space lanes that had once been restricted to hegemony vessels. Trade routes that had been controlled by alien corporations now served the needs of species that had been enslaved for generations. The careful order that had characterized hegemony rule had been replaced by something more chaotic but infinitely more alive, the sounds of civilizations reclaiming their freedom. Maya's reflection in the window showed the changes that 6 months of rebuilding had brought. She still wore the tiger tattoo, but it was no longer hidden beneath a servant's uniform. Now it was displayed proudly on the dress uniform of the newly formed Galactic Defense Force, where she served as Director of Strategic Intelligence. The Predator had emerged from hiding and taken its rightful place at the top of the galactic food chain. Behind her, the council chamber buzzed with activity as representatives from liberated worlds worked to establish the new governmental structures that would replace the hegemony's authoritarian rule. The process was messy and complicated, with species that had been enemies for millennia learning to cooperate as equals. But it was working, slowly and sometimes painfully, because it was built on principles that the hegemony had never understood: cooperation rather than domination, diversity rather than conformity, and the recognition that strength came from unity rather than subjugation. Status report: Maya requested as Dr. Sarah Kim approached with a holographic display showing current galactic conditions. Better than we projected, Dr. Kim replied, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had helped orchestrate the largest intelligence victory in galactic history. The reconstruction efforts are proceeding ahead of schedule in most sectors. Former hegemony territories are establishing independent governments based on the framework we developed. Resource distribution is improving as we eliminate the profit extraction systems that kept most worlds in poverty. Maya nodded, studying the displays that showed the galaxy's recovery. The transformation was remarkable. Worlds that had been strip-mined to feed hegemony industry were being restored with environmental technologies that human scientists had developed from captured alien equipment. Species that had been reduced to slavery were rebuilding their civilizations with resources that had previously been hoarded by their oppressors. But the most dramatic changes were in humanity's status throughout the galaxy. The species that had been dismissed as primitive servants was now recognized as the architect of galactic liberation. Human technologies, improved through 3 years of studying alien systems, were being shared freely with allied worlds. Human strategic expertise was guiding the development of defensive alliances that would prevent any future empire from dominating the galaxy. Resistance movements? Maya asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Scattered and ineffective, Dr. Kim confirmed. Most former hegemony officials have either fled to the Outer Rim territories or accepted integration into the new governmental structures. The few who are still organizing resistance movements are discovering that their former subjects have long memories and little patience for renewed oppression. Maya smiled at the diplomatic phrasing. The reality was that beings who had spent years brutalizing enslaved populations were finding themselves hunted across the galaxy by the very species they had tormented. Justice was being dispensed with a precision that reflected 3 years of careful documentation of war crimes, and few of the hegemony's former leaders were likely to escape the consequences of their actions. And the integration programs? Exceeding all projections. Former hegemony military personnel who demonstrate genuine commitment to democratic principles are being accepted into the new defense forces. We're finding that many alien soldiers were as oppressed by their own government as the populations they were ordered to control. Given the choice between serving an authoritarian empire and protecting a free galaxy, most are choosing freedom. Maya turned from the window to study the main council chamber, where representatives from dozens of species were engaged in heated but constructive debate about the establishment of interstellar trade regulations. The arguments were passionate but civil, with translation systems ensuring that every species could participate fully in their own governance. It was everything the hegemony had not been: messy, democratic, and genuinely representative of galactic diversity. There is one issue that requires your attention, Dr. Kim continued, her expression growing more serious. We've received communication from the Outer Rim territories. Some of the species that fled there are attempting to establish a new empire based on hegemony principles. Maya felt the tiger stir beneath her skin. Details? They call themselves the True Heritage Coalition. They're claiming that the galaxy's natural order requires strong species to dominate weaker ones, and they're attempting to rebuild the hegemony's military structure in the ungoverned territories. Intelligence suggests they're also trying to develop biological weapons specifically designed to target human populations. Maya studied the intelligence reports Dr. Kim handed her, analyzing the threat assessment with the same methodical precision she had applied to studying the original hegemony. The True Heritage Coalition appeared to be composed primarily of species that had held leadership positions in the old empire and refused to accept their loss of power. Recommendations? The Galactic Defense Force could eliminate them as a threat within 6 months, Dr. Kim replied. Our intelligence networks in the Outer Rim are already providing detailed information on their capabilities and intentions. Human special operations teams could neutralize their leadership before they become a serious threat to galactic stability. Maya considered the options while studying the tactical assessments. The coalition was certainly a threat that could grow dangerous if left unchecked, but the response would set an important precedent for how the new galactic government dealt with opposition movements. Alternative approaches? Dr. Kim activated a new set of displays showing different strategic options. We could offer amnesty to coalition members who renounce their supremacist ideology and accept integration into democratic institutions. Economic incentives and educational programs might convert some of their supporters without requiring military action. Maya nodded approvingly. The suggestion reflected the principles that separated the new galactic order from its predecessor, the belief that persuasion was preferable to force, and that former enemies could become allies if given proper motivation and opportunity. Implement both approaches, Maya decided. Offer amnesty and integration opportunities to coalition members who demonstrate genuine commitment to democratic principles. But maintain special operations capabilities to neutralize any who choose to continue threatening galactic security. Dr. Kim smiled at the decision. Carrot and stick approach. Very human. Very effective, Maya corrected. The hegemony failed because they only understood force. We'll succeed because we understand both force and diplomacy, and we know when to apply each one. As they spoke, Maya's communication implant activated with a priority message from Earth. The transmission carried news that made her heart race with a mixture of joy and anticipation. The first generation of children born since liberation was beginning to attend schools that taught the true history of humanity's role in galactic affairs. For 3 years, human children throughout the galaxy had been taught that their species was weak and defeated, that their proper role was to serve superior beings with gratitude and humility. Now they were learning that their parents and older siblings had orchestrated the greatest intelligence operation in galactic history, that humanity had never been conquered but had chosen to appear defeated while preparing for victory. The psychological impact of this revelation was profound. Children who had grown up believing they were inferior were discovering that they belonged to a species capable of outwitting civilizations that had controlled the galaxy for millennia. The next generation of humans would grow up knowing that they were the descendants of the beings who had liberated the galaxy from tyranny. Maya received another communication, this one from the reconstruction efforts on Earth itself. The planet that had been used as an example of successful hegemony conquest was being restored to its former beauty, but with improvements that incorporated the best technologies from across the galaxy. Earth was becoming a showcase for what could be accomplished when diverse species worked together toward common goals. But the most satisfying report came from the former Hegemony Council chamber, which was being converted into a memorial for the species that had been destroyed by alien imperialism. The chamber where Maya had served refreshments while planning the Empire's destruction would become a permanent reminder of the price of authoritarianism and the power of organized resistance. There's something else, Dr. Kim said, her expression growing thoughtful. We've been receiving inquiries from species in distant galaxies, beings who have heard about our liberation campaign and want to know if we can provide assistance with their own oppression problems. Maya felt a familiar stirring of the predatory instincts that had served humanity so well in their campaign against the hegemony. The galaxy was free, but the universe was vast, and there were other empires, other tyrants who believed that strength gave them the right to dominate their neighbors. Assessment of these situations? Dr. Kim activated displays showing intelligence gathered by long-range reconnaissance missions. Preliminary data suggests at least 3 major authoritarian empires in nearby galaxies, each controlling hundreds of star systems through military force and economic exploitation. The patterns are similar to what we faced with the hegemony, technologically advanced species using their advantages to subjugate less developed civilizations. Maya studied the data while tracing the outline of her tattoo. The tiger had awakened in this galaxy, but there were other hunting grounds that might require attention. The principles that had guided humanity's resistance to the hegemony could be applied on an even larger scale, if the need arose and the opportunity presented itself. Begin preliminary intelligence gathering operations, Maya decided. Nothing active, just observation and analysis. We need to understand these situations before we can determine whether intervention would be helpful or appropriate. Dr. Kim nodded approvingly. I'll coordinate with our long-range reconnaissance specialists. They're eager to apply the techniques we developed during our campaign against the hegemony. As Maya returned to studying the reports from across the liberated galaxy, she reflected on the journey that had brought humanity from apparent defeat to galactic leadership. The key had been the willingness to think beyond conventional timelines, to plan operations that measured success in years rather than months, and to understand that the greatest victories sometimes required appearing to lose before you could win. The hegemony had conquered Earth believing they had broken humanity's spirit. They had scattered humans across the galaxy believing they had prevented organized resistance. They had reduced Earth's children to servants and refugees believing they had eliminated humanity as a threat. Instead, they had provided humanity with the perfect opportunity to study their enemies, infiltrate their power structures, and position assets throughout their empire. The hegemony's own success had become the instrument of their destruction. Maya looked out at the busy space lanes around New Geneva Station, watching ships from 100 worlds traveling freely through space that had once been controlled by alien tyrants. The galaxy was healing, growing stronger through diversity rather than uniformity, and learning to value cooperation over domination. The tiger tattoo on her back seemed to pulse with satisfaction as she considered humanity's transformation from apparent victims to galactic liberators. The predator had awakened not just to hunt, but to protect. Earth's children had learned to use their greatest strengths, intelligence, adaptability, and the capacity for long-term strategic thinking to defend not just themselves but all species threatened by authoritarianism. But the tiger remained alert, watching for new threats and new opportunities to defend freedom across the vast expanse of space. The galaxy was free, but freedom required constant vigilance against those who would exploit the weak and dominate the innocent. Somewhere in distant galaxies, other tyrants rule through fear and oppression. Someday, they might discover what the hegemony had learned too late, that the most dangerous predators often appeared harmless until the moment they chose to strike. Humanity had awakened, and the universe would never be the same. The tigers were no longer sleeping, and they were very, very hungry for justice.